Welcome to the Best Music Podcast with Dan Spencer, where we talk about music and the methods for making music with top performers in the music industry. This week's featured guest is Taylor Eigsti. Now, Taylor has garnered multiple individual Grammy Award nominations over the years for his work as a recording artist and composer, including Best Instrumental Composition and Best Jazz Instrumental Solo. Taylor also co-wrote a featured composition with Don Cheadle for the 2017 Grammy-winning soundtrack to the motion picture Miles Ahead. Great movie. Check it out, folks. Over the past 30 years, Taylor has had the good fortune of performing, touring, or recording with such luminaries, buckle in, people, here we go, as Dave Brubeck, Chris Botti, Joshua Redman, Sting, John Mayer, Esperanza Spalding, Chick Corea, Terence Blanchard, Joshua Bell, Snarky Puppy, Vanessa Williams, Chris Potter, Nicholas Payton, Christian McBride, McCoy Tyner, Red Holloway, James Moody, Kurt Rosenwinkel, Joe Lovano, and many others. Taylor has traveled internationally quite extensively with his trio and quartet, and also been a frequent and integral part of the regular touring bands of Chris Botti and Gretchen Parlato. Incredible musicians both. Taylor has also been featured numerous times in various television specials, NPR appearances, commercials, and composing the theme music to the motion picture Detachment in 2011, starring Oscar winner Adrien Brody, collaborating on the score with the Newton Brothers. In 2019, Taylor was also featured on a television special with Chris Botti for PBS's Great Performances, his 8th album as a leader and his first brand new album in 11 years, called Tree Falls, is out now wherever you get your music on GSI Records. You can also check him out in New York City on September 23rd at Le Poisson Rouge. I was thinking about that French name coming down the line, and oh boy, did that trip me up. New York City, September 23rd, Le Poisson Rouge, for the CD release party. It's going to be a great time. You can also check out Taylor at tayjazz.com. That's TAYJAZZ.com, Facebook.com, Instagram, and Twitter. Taylor Eigsti. Taylor, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Taylor, to get us started off, could you maybe tell me a little bit about a piece of music you've heard in the past couple days or past week or so that really stood out to you?
Sure. Well, I think something recently that it was something that I knew well from a long time ago, but I was just revisiting. There's an album by Kenny Wheeler, great trumpeter, called New High, spelled GNU and then high. And there's a tune on it called Smatter that I really love. But it's Kenny Wheeler with Keith Jarrett, Dave Holland, and Jack DeJohnette. Nice. And that's just one of my all-time favorite. When I hear that tune, but that record, there's something about the way they're all playing together that kind of feels like they're all playing on top of a cloud in a way. It's just a really fun. I was just reminded of how much time I spent with that record many years ago. But to hear it again recently, it just kind of all became new again in a lot of ways. So I think in terms of things I've checked out just purely for enjoyment purposes recently, that would be one of them.
And when you say you spent a lot of time with that record in the past, was that like learning what Keith Jarrett was doing and translating that onto the piano, doing what we would call transcription? Or was it just general listening? Like sometimes you find an album, there's just so much to dig through and learn from it that you're just sitting there listening to it.
Definitely the latter. I never really personally learned to play music through transcribing. But, different people have different takes on that, because everyone, I think, learns in a different way. Some people are visual learners. Some people are, I have bizarre, a deep affinity for color coding things and all sorts of things. So, people have different ways of learning things. And for me, transcription just wasn't the method that I went about doing things. But I have transcribed handful of things over the years, but usually of other instruments. So I find that you get a lot out of, for me, like transcribing, like a great bass line, or an avant-garde soprano solo by someone, or during during the middle of the quarantine last year, I sat down and wrote out a grid of a particular Eminem rap. His rhyme schemes are just, I just, where he puts them, he'll put like interior little 5/8 passages and things like that, and it's like studying a great drum solo. So for an album like New High, when I was, I probably heard that for the first time when I was in college, when I was going to USC, and I had a lot of friends around me that were always listening to a ton of music, and so I think that a big part of listening in my world comes from social listening with other people, and when you're listening with other people to something, that you can find a deeper enjoyment in it, especially if you're around someone else that you're both woohooing at the same time and all that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, that would have been an album that I just, loved playing over and over. And that tune in particular too, it's just something that, over time I've kind of allowed myself to go through a lot of different phases of being fascinated by certain different types of music. And, but that was certainly, I definitely, probably was, a lot of driving when I was living in LA, so a lot of driving around, so probably just having that CD and listening to it a bunch.
So maybe for us to find our way to really talk about what does work for you in terms of your learning style and your playing style, we should take a little bit of a step back and tell people about, you were essentially a child prodigy. You started playing at 4. So I've got a couple questions there that maybe will then lead us back to the present day. So what gets you qualified? What aspect of your musicality is coming through at that age where people are going, wait a second, hold on, this kid's got something and we need to give him as much as he can take?
Well, it's a really great question also in how you just how you framed that question, because when I look back at videos of me playing as a kid, I started kind of doing gigs. Maybe the first performance I can kind of remember, I think I was maybe 8 years old. But when you're a little kid and you're just at the instrument and performing, you don't have to be that good. But people seeing that are going to be like, oh my God, it's a prodigy. Because, I've seen prodigies, like, all you have to do is go on YouTube or whatever. It's you'll see some 1.5-year-old like tearing up a bass line from from Bratislava or something, and it's like, oh my God, like there's real. I don't understand how that works, like how someone can develop that quickly at such an early age, because I never really considered myself, and looking back, I can't really fathom being legitimately a part of that world in that sense. It just was, when you're a kid and you have a lot of people around you telling you you're good at something, it forms a pretty incredible support system and kind of drives a lot of natural confidence. So I definitely, while there was a phase in my life, like when I started to be, I was doing gigs as a teenager and all that, and later on I was happy that tag started to be removed. I wanted people to take my music seriously, and I didn't want them to just kind of look at it like a novelty in that regard. But really trying to look at everything from the perspective of seeing where I'm at now and kind of the beginnings of how I got there. I really I'm thankful that I had that, because also it helped give me the idea of what I wanted to do in my life at a really early age. And so I'm really thankful that happened. And shoot, it would be something that more people would come to gigs and things like that, because they're like, oh, it's that kid or whatever. So I don't know. I think the characteristics that come with a prodigy, to me, the biggest ones are just, it's someone who's very young doing something, and doing it at least at a level that's not, utterly terrible or something. So that was kind of my how I was a part of that world. It led to a lot of news articles, or getting on, being an 8th grader with there's the local news following me around in classes, or those kind of things that are kind of fun in a way, but then also lead to a lot of like weird repressed jealousy of the other kids at that age when there's someone kind of getting attention like that and things like that. So, but it's always a really interesting world to me, that world of like, anytime I meet other people too that grew up kind of in that sort of situation where people were referring to them like that. I've played so much over the years with great guitarist Julian Lage. He also grew up in the Bay Area just like me, and also just like me had that whole definitely the prodigy thing when he was a lot younger and everything, and speaking with people like to him or Eldar or other people that I know that have had that sort of a situation. It's kind of different for everyone too. But one thing that I'm very happy about is that growing up, I just went to regular schools. I never went to any conservatory or music school or anything like that. So I've been able to grow up in an environment that I was around enough non-musicians and people without the prodigy thing hanging over them to kind of like develop into a social, somewhat normal person, I think, rather than being in some sort of bubble and all that. And my parents were always aware of that too. They were always like really, they wanted to protect me as a person, to just allow me to be a regular, to grow up into a regular dude and not be really socially isolated or different things like that. So, but it's an interesting question.
So to talk a little bit more specifically about this, and I absolutely do want to talk about the psychological implications of that label, and then how that plays out now and that whole story. But to really say that, in summary, what I'm hearing from you is when you're looking back at tapes of yourself playing when you were much younger, you're not seeing what we would think of now as a YouTube prodigy, which is typically this really high level of technical proficiency, or this really, what from the outside looks like an innate understanding of complex harmony. When you see these kids just like blowing over the most ridiculous changes you've ever heard in your life, and you're like, wait a second, like,
right.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Like, what's happening here? So what you're describing is that this was a time before we had these YouTube prodigies. And so maybe the understanding or the idea of what a child prodigy was not the same thing. We were thinking of child prodigies as children who were playing, like you start at 4, you get to 8, you've been playing for 4 years. That's a significant amount of time. You're playing with a degree of proficiency. Obviously, you're talented. Obviously, you're gifted. But am I understanding correct that you're saying that you don't really see the YouTube prodigy in your early playing? You just see someone who is naturally gifted at music and is proficient at their instrument?
Yeah, it kind of that would probably sum it up. I don't think. I'm glad that I didn't grow up in the that I wasn't that age in the YouTube generation and stuff too, because it just, I don't know, I was able to process things and kind of go through all that stuff in a much more, maybe a healthier way than worrying about viral things or just being on the internet. It's just a different world to be living in, to go through that kind of experience that naturally would be really different. But yeah, I just saw myself, like when I listened back to, I recently imported a whole ton of VHS tapes from a long time ago, and was kind of listening back through things, and I was pretty good at endings. I could usually create kind of a nice little, really, beautiful ending of a tune and stuff. I'm like, all right, cool. I was
6'9" and there's a sharp 11. Taylor knows how to end a song.
I'm a nice, pleasant ending guy, but I really didn't. There just wasn't too many. Also, I was. It wasn't until I was about 11 or 12 until I started taking classical lessons and got better technique too. So in terms of just like technical facility and things like that, I think I was. I started taking jazz lessons when I was 6 from my teacher. His name is Randy Masters, and I was 6 years old, and I'd have these 2 or 3 hour lessons with him where he would just be exposing me to a lot of music, getting me interested in things, getting me composing, we would sit there talking about like aliens and stuff for like a long time. Like he's such an interesting guy. And so I think in a lot of respects, the kind of the early training and lessons that I had kind of just opened up my mind and made me want to be creative and want to, be able to explore all of the fun aspects of everything that's cool about playing music. And then later on, I think was when I was lucky to start studying with a great classical teacher when I was around 11 or 12 that he named Cole Dalton. And he kind of allowed me to, he saw that I had really bizarre technique in some respects. My, doing things like chromatic scale that I might it might just be going upwards with these three fingers like a hermit crab, or like weird things like that I would do that would kind of, I cross over my pinky a lot, all of this kind of stuff. And he basically, yeah, which is still that's a regular part of my playing where I with my approach, like I treat the pinky kind of like it's another fourth finger. It's something that, so this classical teacher, he told me, he's like, well, I want you to understand like better fingering and better technique and all this, but I'm not going to try to change those things because they're deeply embedded. We're going to try to make sure that you're doing those things the right way too, and so, he was kind of unconventional too. Cause I think for him, it was an interesting experience teaching someone that had only grown up learning jazz. So many people that I know, they grow up learning classical music or things like that, and then they move to jazz and improvising and doing other stuff. But I kind of did it in reverse. But then that really kind of opened the door to a lot of, just better technique and things where I could kind of get a lot of ideas out that I just remember having so many experiences when I was 8 or 9 and going to see a show and coming home and just kind of wanting to zip around and do runs and things that I saw but I couldn't quite do it yet. So my hands would just kind of BS it, and I'd be like throwing my hand up and down the keyboard and which later on, it's one of some of the things I tell my students too, just like getting used to the physical habit of one motion. The notes will fill themselves in later, but the idea of moving around a lot and doing different things, I was always wanting to do that. And then when I, kind of studied other kind of, just even foundational things for, proper fingering for things, the proper way to get a tone out of the piano and get power without overusing muscles in your arms and things like that. So, but I was fortunate to kind of get both of those angles. I was still studying with Randy at the time too, so just all of the interesting musical things that I was getting into, and also then finally getting paired with some technique that was really useful to kind of continue in developing and all that.
Perhaps we could take just a brief moment and break down for people who don't play piano why it's so crazy. Well, it's not crazy. Listen, whatever works. But the reason why I had that reaction when you said crossing over the fourth finger, because in polite piano society, well, my dear, it's quite simply not done. And what you're talking about doing, maybe you could break down for listeners and explain it verbally, so if anyone's listening on audio, they can really understand why this is an unconventional thing.
Sure. A lot of times, well, for the listeners also that only are on audio, I apologize because I'm also I'll switch back to the keyboard cam so it makes a little bit more sense too. Usually when you're fingering a scale, you're crossing over your thumb at different points. And so, for instance, an A major scale is going to be divided into those two chunks. And
Taylor, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Could you just describe what that crossing over of the thumb actually is?
Sure. With these three notes, I'm using thumb, index, and middle. 1, 2, 3, and then the thumb kind of ends up crossing underneath when you're getting to the next part of that major scale. And I'm going thumb, index, middle, and fourth then at that point. So most scales are kind of a combination of little fingering chunks and things like that. And so when it gets to kind of bigger maybe like a big cascade or a run, there might be something that I would do if I want to get the sound of. I'm going to be using my fifth finger as part of those fingering chunks and basically crossing over because, I like the sound. There's something about the sound of that, ways of doing that, or if I'm going to jump up to another area of the piano. Sometimes I can use my fifth finger as a kind of a springboard. And and I'm definitely not the only one who does that kind of a thing, but it's something that I've found really useful when I'm playing to be able to jump around a lot more, and also kind of sometimes when I'm soloing and things, sometimes different shapes and parts of the line that I want to get to. I might have different kind of angular shapes in mind, and so it just gives you more options. And it's something that it helps that I've been crossing over my pinky for 32, 33 years. So definitely I'm just really comfortable with using that finger as just kind of one of the one of all the rest and that sort of thing. I hope that made sense to anyone just listening in audio, but who knows?
But how did you find your way there? Because typically when we teach beginners or when beginners learn piano, you go 1, 2, 3. So 1 being your thumb, 2 being your index, 3 being your middle, and then cross the thumb under, or if you're on your way down, cross 3 over 1 or 4 over 1. It depends on context. But how did you find your way there, and why was that? I just don't. It's like how?
I think it probably is mainly based on the fact that I had been playing for something like 7 or 8 years before I really ever had a proper classical piano lesson, and while I knew normal fingerings of major scales and things like that, I was also doing just a lot of things that no one was telling me not to do, and so it kind of became a part of just my playing. If I wanted to. There's different things where in the way that the hand is designed, if I wanted to do something that sounded like this, for me the only way to really do that effectively is to play all 5 fingers and then just do that again up here, but I'm crossing my thumb over my pinky on the way, and so something like that. And there's different scenarios where I might want to finger it differently and not have the fifth in there, because there's kind of a punchy sound to that I really like. That if it's I'm trying to think of another example of a scale like this, maybe thumb, index, middle, thumb, index, middle, fourth. That's the traditional way of fingering something like that. But if I'm doing that as kind of a cascade or a bigger thing, there's a good chance I'll probably just use 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Which to me, there's a subtlety to how that can be a little bit smoother, but it depends on kind of the context of the tune, or the context of where I might be playing in a tune and what it might call for. And kind of, trying to be aware of that with a lot of sustain pedal control, like the real subtleties to the sustain pedal. It just gives you a lot more depth in textural variety if you have more ways to finger certain scales, depending on what you want to get out of the tone of that,
So going back to the Prodigy, was there a moment in time where you had a self-reflective perspective where you could say to yourself, okay, I've had this press, this has been cool, I've had this attention, this has been cool, but I also need to be a human in addition to the prodigy or musician, and then also getting to that age where it's like, okay, the kid's 13, 14, can we really call them a prodigy anymore? Did you have a moment?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not I'm not sure, in the sense that I guess I always had a balance growing up, and I'm really grateful to have had a balance. You know, most of my friends growing up were non-musicians, because especially if I was playing with musicians, oftentimes they'd be way older, sometimes crazy older. You know, doing gigs when I'm 12 or 13, sometimes with the drummer might be, you know, 80, you know, or when I got into my early teens and I had the opportunity to play with a lot of like really legendary musicians, you know, they were great, but they weren't my same age. And so it wasn't until maybe a little later on. I mean, the first year I ever went to Stanford Jazz Workshop as a student, I was 11 years old. And the first combo I was in there had some pretty legendary musicians in it. Ambrose Akinmusri, Thomas Pridgeon, Dana Stevens. It just really... Charles Altura, and a lot of those people I still play with to this day, and they've gone on to do so many great things. And that was kind of probably my first interaction with other people my age that did the same kind of thing. And I knew that I had more fun doing that than anything else too. Like, just to be able to meet people who are my same age who did do what I do and all of that kind of stuff. And you know, I always would have that within, you know, for the rest of my life in musician friends and groups that I play with and everything. But then by going to a non-music school, it just made sure that my life was always balanced out with at least the same number of non-music world friends, you know, and I played a ton of sports and video games and everything growing up, that especially sports too. I mean, that was a growing up, that was always a huge fascination of mine. If I didn't grow up to be a musician, the other thing that there's a part of me, and it comes out when I'm watching games too, that legitimately I kind of wanted a career as a NFL coach, and football has always been like kind of my, other than music, like kind of biggest passion in a lot of ways in life. And so there was moments when I kind of thought, because I was, you know, I'm not like the biggest guy in the world, or you know, but I was a decent quarterback, and I was good at basketball and all sorts of stuff, that I kind of could sense though too that there probably would never be a route in life doing that professionally. But then coaching in high school, I coached the 8th grade boys, their football team, and also did some coaching of the 6th grade basketball team and things like that. And I really fell in love with coaching too, and I just really loved that side of it, that I could see. And I could have seen at a certain point another route in my life where I would have tried to work my way up into you know, be offensive quality control coordinator, or assistant special team coach, or, you know, things like that, to try to work my way up into that world. Because especially sometimes when I'm watching I'm a gigantic 49ers fan, and when I'm watching some of their games last year, I'm calling all these plays in my head for them that they're not doing, that just, I felt like that other life, that in a parallel dimension where I grew up to be a football coach, I wish I could have seen what that would be like and explored it. Probably would be a lot more stressful than playing music, even as stressful as that gets sometimes. So, but you know, I draw comparisons all the time, and find parallels in things that I've learned from, you know, reading biographies on Bill Walsh and some great coaches and things like that, in terms of injecting some of those things into a practice routine, or things I tell students in master classes, or all that kind of stuff. So there's still a lot that I got from that world. But basically at every point growing up, I always had that balance of, like, I was around, you know, just people who weren't musicians, who didn't have any kind of, you know, prodigy thing or all that kind of stuff. So I guess in retrospect, I don't regret any part of growing up that way, because it gave me a sense of balance. And I think also when I'm playing with different groups, you know, as a sideman, I have to do my homework, and I have to, you know, show up prepared and really know the music and all of that kind of stuff. But also, when you're on tours with people, and all I've done for the majority of my, like, the past, whatever, 15, 20 years of just it's touring, and touring with groups where every member of that group, you see them at all hours of the day. You know what they smell like at 4 a.m. You know what everyone smells like at 4 a.m. And, it's a really intimate thing that you're around people on these tours like all the time. You see a lot of them and things like that. And so the ability to get along with people, I have a no policy in terms of musicians that I work with. So I'm really lucky that everyone I work with are people that I really dearly enjoy being around. And I don't, life is too short to play with people that I don't connect with on a personal level. And it's amazing how that always gets mirrored into the music, where just knowing someone socially allows me to comp for them better, and kind of, when you know someone so well that you can kind of predict the pauses in the conversation or the places where they inject a joke or different things like that, that's all a part of the musical ebb and flow and communication too. So, all of those things about growing up in a social environment with non-musicians and people that, aren't from the arts world and all that kind of stuff really gave me a great social perspective that I've been able to use as like in my world, because I can get along with people and, and I can kind of get on their wavelength when I'm on tour with them and that sort of thing. So
I think you do still have a chance because, listen, football's played in the fall and the winter.
Yeah.
Musicians tour in the spring and the summer. All I'm saying is,
believe me, I'm waiting by the phone, so I'm definitely, anytime they need me. So I've definitely tried to organize a lot of my professional life around 49ers games over the years. There was a couple Chris Botti gigs that I did where I had my phone in the piano streaming the game, and he would come over in between solos to check the score and stuff too. But but also just. Like I've been fortunate over time to meet a lot of 49ers and get to know some of them, and just that world. I'm always going to have a deep love and attachment to that world. It's like just what I grew up loving so much, and music. But it's funny that some of my best friends, I have kind of a podcast that I'm starting with a friend of mine, Joe Sanders, who's a great bassist.
Oh, do you have a name for it? We can plug it.
It's called You're Effing Welcome with Joe and Taylor.
Okay.
But it's not out yet. So
okay.
We've recorded a few episodes to kind of so that we have something in the bank, so that once we premiere it and like do a live episode or something like that, we have a few things to release from the archives. But it's fun talking to him, because he's one of my best friends, and I've known him for so long, and we used to be roommates and all that. But when the two of us, both musicians, start talking, it's like we intend on balancing it between sports segments and music segments and all this other things, and it ends up being like 98% sports, and then we get around to like music for a couple minutes, and then that's time's up. So I've grown up with a real sense of balance, and I really have my parents to thank for that, because they wanted me to have that. They wanted me to know how to hang out with people and get along with them and be social. I think it's a really important thing, and the people around me that I love the most and enjoy being around and playing with the most, they're coming from the same world too.
Well, we've talked about your past, we've talked about your passions. Let's talk about your present. So your latest album, Tree Falls. Now, folks, this is 21st century jazz. If we're gonna describe this album as a genre, which, okay, fine, the label's invented genre. Okay, whatever. Look, guys, this is incredible. So it's like all these different genres throughout the entire album. There's like some hip hop vibes, some R&B vibes. There's like some, I don't know, maybe we call it math jazz. I don't know. Look,
might be a little bit of that. Yeah, sure.
A little bit of math jazz going on, and overall, it's such an incredible spread of different colors and different feelings and different emotions. Maybe we've talked about Bandwiches previously on this podcast, like the actual, like, you know, what, when you're playing a gig, what gets fed to you when you're in the band. Maybe you could talk a little bit about your experience with Bandwiches and why you decided to dedicate one of the songs on the album by, in fact, naming it Bandwiches.
Man, that's a fun one to talk about. Boy, and thank you also that about the album. It's always been hard for me to kind of this album. I wanted it to be more personal, and I had waited 11 years to release something, so I wanted the music on it. I write music for symphony orchestra. I do solo shows, trio, quartet, play with singers, all this kind of stuff, and so it took me a while to determine like which route am I going on. You know, if I was going to do another record, like what do I want to do? And so I wanted it to have a combination of the stuff that was the most personal to me and mostly original music and songs that that just, when I have an idea, I definitely have never said to myself, like, if an idea is coming out and it sounds like it comes from like a different genre or a different world of music, you know, I just think of them as ideas, and my music involves improvising, so it usually gets put in the jazz world, but it's also just inspired by so many other things outside of kind of the history of most of my other records were a little bit more kind of just straight ahead jazz in different ways, but this definitely has it's a little bit more undefined, which I enjoy, but then that's also a tricky thing too when you're promoting an album or marketing it and or just describing my music to an Uber driver, like where, you know, you get in and they were like, hey, do you want some off-brand mints? And you're like, no. And then they're like, well, you know, what do you do? I'm a musician. Oh yeah, what kind of music do you play? And then I get into this whole stupid situation where I'm like, oh, well, it's kind of, you know, what's a little bit of, there's a branch of this. And then the Uber driver's like checked out at that point, you know. And my own music has always been hard to make an elevator pitch for, you know, like it's a little bit hard to define, but that's my goal musically in a way, is to just create something that hopefully people would just enjoy it without necessarily having to draw a comparison. Because a lot of these tunes, I've written during this period of time that where I didn't release any of my own things, and the purpose and meaning behind the album was to finally share those things, and that, you know, I kept on making things and creating things, but not sharing them with people. And so, are they making a sound? Does it exist? You know, so that's kind of the meaning behind the overall scope of Tree Falls. But within that album, I tried to have a lot of different tunes that would tell kind of a personal story in my life. Bandwiches just happened to be a tune that it's interesting because Eric Harland, who is the co-owner of GSI and also played drums on the record, one of my favorite musicians and people, when we were tracking that tune, he said, oh man, this is kind of like Argument Part 2. And I wrote a song called Argument that was on an album of mine called Lucky to Be Me that I released in 2006 on Concord. And that particular track, I was lucky enough to get a Grammy nomination for instrumental composition. But that was always kind of like a tune I had that had all these, it was supposed to simulate an argument. It had all this like back and forth and hits and it was supposed to be very angular and, you know, have all those kind of things. And so this tune in different ways kind of, when Eric said that, I was like, I never thought of it that way, but it does feel like it's kind of like almost a continuation of that particular tune. And I just named it after something that I find frustrating sometimes over time, which is, you know, the backstage food that you get, and which it's hit or miss, you know, kind of depends on, you know, there's some people that love to eat crickets. So this is nothing against any listeners that do enjoy crickets, but like I remember just different gigs in Mexico where there's like just a bowl of crickets or like, you know, just things that like, and again, there's many people really love that. So it's just not for me. I'm not a cricket eating guy really. And, you know, but then just the worst are the little sandwiches that are like cut and they got like a kind of a soggy tortilla that's like wrapped around it in a circle. And I just, those are the absolute worst. Or you get an entire table of just chips, which I know myself, like I'm not going to stay away from the chips, so it doesn't serve any good functions in terms of if I'm trying to eat healthy on a particular tour or something. And I'm like, oh, thanks. There's a whole table of chips. Oh, do you have anything other than chips? Yeah, bread, and then, or just something else, or like, or then there's a bunch of cookies. And it's like these kinds of situations definitely happen all the time. So I did want the song to be a little bit of a tribute to that, because those have sadly been a big part of my life, is just backstage food. So it's a personal story. Yeah.
Speaking of personal tracks, something that really sprung to mind just now when you were talking about how these were really personal stories that you're trying to share was the opening of Rainbow, and not even the part where there's that spoken word thing at the beginning, but just harmonically and sonically, there's almost this longing or sadness or nostalgia that comes across in the music. Could you talk a little bit about what Rainbow is trying to talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. So Rainbows I wrote as a tribute to my sister who passed away when I was 3, and she was 17, and she was a young jazz and rock pianist, and she had cancer, and when she was in the hospital when she was about 14 or 15, the Doobie Brothers came to perform in the hospital, and they had her sit in, and then she got along with them so well that then they had her sit in with them at Shoreline Amphitheater in front of 20,000 people, and had her record on their album Cycles. They actually dedicated their album Cycles to her, and so she was someone that I only got to know for 3 years of my life. 3 years when I was just a little, like tiny kid. So my memories are like, Christmas morning, unwrapping presents or something. She's there. Like some of my memories are almost more through the lens of some old VHS tapes that I've been able to dig up and all that kind of stuff. And my whole life growing up, the two people that I've lost many people really close to me, but 2 immediate family members. My dad passed away when I was 12, and he was a drummer and a satellite engineer, and I was very close to him. And it's been always been a kind of a nagging thing for me in my life, where I'm like, wow, I never felt inspired enough to write a song for my sister or for my dad. Still haven't written a song for my dad, but maybe that'll come at some point. What drove the process of writing Rainbows was, so when she was in the hospital, she was always really obsessed with rainbows and rainbow stickers everywhere and all of this. And I knew it was something that she liked to have around her, and it made her happy, which ties into my life actually, in the sense that I always have colored lights all the way all around everywhere. I color code everything. I have synesthesia or chromesthesia too, so that plays into how I kind of operate is through a lot of color coding and weird things that I do that involve colored pens like every day. So, but my mother, right now she's in the very late stages of progressed dementia. I mean, she's in an assisted living facility in North Carolina, and can't really communicate and all that kind of stuff. But over the last several years, I was it took about 4 solid years at least to when we saw that she was getting way pretty bad. We wanted to move her to North Carolina, where my uncle, her brother, lives, because then he could be around her, kind of taking care, watching by. We didn't even know yet that she would have to go into assisted living and all of that at the time. But I would do all these in between touring and 7 trips to Japan every year and all this kind of different things. Like I would always be coming back to the Bay Area almost every month, maybe every couple of months, to do a show, largely because I since I grew up there, I built up a nice following, so I can, book some fun gigs there, do symphony shows and all sorts of different things. And, but it would always be a chance to see my mom, and check in on her and all of that. And so I would always try to take the chance to be out there as much as I could. And then when she started getting way worse and we kind of developed this plan to bring her across the country, I needed to clear her house out and get it sold and all of this. And the other thing about my mother is that she was a level 11 out of 10 hoarder. I've watched these hoarder shows and like Marie Kondo, all that, like they don't hold a candle to they haven't seen anything yet. This was insane, 6 feet of just random garbage in every room and stuff, where it'd be like, old manuals of like a VCR from 25 years ago and dog treats from 1994. And then, there's my social security card. So basically I had to go through everything and needle and haystack everything. And it took almost 4 years of, toiling with that whole process and kind of pulling off something that I kind of felt was at the start of that process, at least, fairly impossible. But in doing so, in clearing out that family home that my family had since 1980, I unearthed so many different things from my sister and from, just like real precious things. Her diaries and essays that she wrote when she was dying. And I got to know her a lot more via this kind of process of going through everything and unearthing all these kind of gems, and video footage that I didn't know existed and all sorts of different things. And actually that little clip at the beginning of Rainbows is her voice as an 8-year-old on a little tape that I found, where she was doing a little recital in the home. And she said, "And now I will go back to the piano playing." And so there was something just really precious about that I wanted to put at the beginning of the tune, just to kind of center my thoughts as to where that tune, the place that I want to play it from when I do play that song. And but what led to that song the most was, out of everything that I found an audio cassette tape of my sister's memorial service in 1988. And it's weird because I was there, but I was crawling around the pews or something. I was just, I was a toddler. I didn't know what the hell was going on. I could understand even at the age of 3, though, that she wasn't coming back. So I understood some of those concepts, but I didn't really, I was still just a kid. I'm crawling around on the floor and whatever. So I never really felt like I attended it. So my first inclination obviously was just to be like, oh boy, well, I don't want to go down that road. But then I looked at it again. I'm like, no, you know what? Out of respect for her, I want to go attend her memorial service. And so I drove out to a parking lot in Stanford, and I popped in the tape in my car, and I listened for an hour as like friends of my sister, my family members, like all these people talked about her and celebrated her and read things that she wrote, and there was this outpouring of love that and I kind of, all of a sudden, it's like I got her, like I understood something that I hadn't before about my sister. And I went inside Stanford and I broke into a practice room and I wrote that whole thing start to finish in 20 minutes. It just came out of me. And I wish every composition was that quick and easy to write, but that one I knew what to write after I listened to that, and so it was it's a special tune for me because it kind of connects me with her, and also there was something about in thinking of a title, there was something about the arc of that tune that kind of starts small and kind of gets a lot bigger and then comes back down, kind of like the arc of a rainbow. So it was a combination of all of those elements, but that's basically the origin of that tune and kind of like where some of that some of the emotion in the tune comes from.
Wow. That's a really incredible story. Thank you for sharing that, Taylor.
Of course.
We can absolutely edit this out, but would you mind talking about how synesthesia plays a role in music, or what the impacts are there for you? I think that's just massively fascinating.
Yeah, well, it's something that also I think is it's one of those things that probably until 8-10 years ago, I didn't even really know it existed or know what it was. I just was always like, doesn't everyone kind of get a general sense of violet when they play F sharp major? Like, just I just thought that everyone kind of experienced stuff this way, but then people, like, articles started to come out about like what that is, and I was like, oh, whatever, that I definitely have that, because I'm like, I just know that my whole life, and I've been obsessed with color coding things and all this kind of stuff, and so yeah, I read a little bit more about it and everything, and it's interesting my relationship to that, because everyone is very different with that and how they everyone is different in the type of synesthesia that they might have too. For me, I get it from I get a vague color sensation from different letters and numbers, which show up in chord symbols and also the names of notes and things like that. And also when I'm playing certain notes or playing certain chords, G major and G minor are always different shades of red, and for me they can't be anything other than that. It's just if I tried to play a piece of sheet music where everything was in different colors than what I see when I'm, looking at those chords or playing those chords, it would be very disorienting, like really hard to, it's like one of those things, if you have ever seen those things that pop up online sometimes where it's a bunch of the words of different colors, like green, red, the RED, GREEN, but written in a different color, yes. That can kind of be trippy to try to figure out, what the brain is doing there. So for me, like sometimes, there's just different things where D minor, for instance, is always like kind of light blue with a little hint of yellow hanging out in it. And so if I'm writing a big symphony orchestra piece or something like that, and I got zillions of staff paper with ideas on it that's laying around, I'll print out staff paper that's light blue paper, so that I know that where all my D minor ideas are and things like that. And actually, and also the chromesthesia, which is the association with color. Synesthesia is just when two senses get kind of paired together in a different way. And but chromesthesia is the type of that specifically deals with color. And the chromesthetic system that I associate with different notes is so different than other people that I know who also have synesthesia. Over time, I've met different musicians who also have it. And so it's interesting. James Francis is a great young piano player that he also has it, but he and I have showed each other which colors we see on which notes and stuff, and it couldn't be more different.
Oh, wow.
But also the other thing about that is it never changes. It's like a non-moving system. There was a really creative lighting engineer that I had a conversation with maybe 6 years ago, let's say, or something, where he had asked me, can you draw on this blank piano the colors that you're seeing for these individual notes and all that? And then he hit me up like 5 years later or whatever it was, and he was like, oh man, I lost that thing, can you make it again? And I sent it, and but he actually still had it, and he just wanted to see if it was the same. It was exactly the same.
Wow.
Thing, and so those colors that get associated, they never change. James also told me once that he has it a little bit with smell too. So if he hears a deceptive cadence to D flat,
I'm sorry. We're getting specific with the type of cadence for colors.
Oh yeah. So this right here, when James told me that when he plays that, he smells bacon, or he can smell like kind of more of like a barbecue smell. If he ever sees this, he'll definitely cry. I'm getting something wrong about exactly what that thing is, but he has it even swapping in smells and things. So just different senses can be kind of thrown into the mix and that sort of thing. One area where I've never really come across it as a bad thing though, like it's never really been a block or something. It's not like a disability or limitation. It's just something that, some weird little thing in the brain that I mean, to me, I just try to use it functionally. So color coding things, I color code almost everything in terms of keeping track of things. And I just used it recently. I just played on the score of Terence Blanchard. We just did a scoring session for a upcoming Spike Lee docuseries that's coming out on HBO on, I think, August 22nd. It's called NYC Epicenters. And so it was, 3-4 days of tracking, and the first 3 with a symphony orchestra, and myself, Brandy Younger, who's a incredible harpist. The two of us are kind of featured together with the orchestra throughout the whole docuseries, and it kind of, the imagery is really powerful. It documents New York City, how they've dealt with like 9/11 to COVID, and how New York City has kind of survived everything. It's kind of Spike's love letter to New York, and it's a really powerful documentary that I can't wait to actually see it all in the end. But the last day of that tracking session, Terence wanted me and Brandy to kind of isolate the 5 or 6 main themes that had been reoccurring in all of the cues and in all of the tracking from the 3 previous days, and then improvise on those themes, just so that they had other things too that they can place in throughout the series. And I looked over at her at one point that because everyone makes fun of me with my colored pens and all that, but it's like, because I like marking things up a whole lot. But what I had done was I had gone through, and in a stack of sheet music that was like yay high, I had in the corner, I had developed a color for all of the different themes. So if there was one theme dealing with one specific melody, I would be like, okay, that one's going to be red. And so I would go through the stack, and any of the themes that were that theme, I would add red there and stuff. Then I would go through and find ones that were like my blue theme and, orange and whatever. And I put all of those then in a stack where they were organized by those colors. And while they were over there with a mountain of sheet music, like trying to be like, well, which theme goes with which? And I'm like, guys, you see what I was saying? Like, so I'm like, just take the red ones, take the blue ones. Those are all going to be the different themes, so it can have a lot of practical uses in terms of just color coding things, or I'm really fortunate that I'm not colorblind. Like that would, that I don't know what life would be like. I'm really happy that I can be around colors and, engage with that in an artistic way.
Wow. Taylor, I could keep on talking to you for like hours and hours and hours. You have to come back next time you drop something. I think what we could do now is maybe a quick like rapid fire question, just question response, and we'll get you out of here on time, if not early. So let's talk a little bit about lifestyle, practice, and creativity and performance. So what is the number of hours of sleep that when you drop below it, you feel an impact on your creativity or performance?
Well, it's very inconsistent. I think in a weird, probably not that healthy way, my body's adapted to that being inconsistent. I mean, it was in 2019 and any time before that, like I was doing so much like international touring that I just never had a time zone. I never had a body clock, so it was just kind of trying to be able to fall asleep and convince myself that like, oh, I guess the sun's out, so that makes a difference. There'd be a lot of different. I remember the loopiest I ever felt was going to Japan for a tour, and then coming back home to New York for a day and a half, and then heading back to Japan. And then by the time I landed there again, I was like in a dream state of, so time zones always made that a weird challenge. But then also, when all of a sudden you're really used to that, and now you're stuck at home because of pandemic and whatever, that was hard to adapt to too. And so for me, there's a trick that someone that I heard a friend of a friend said that it claimed to have never had a headache. And I'm like, that's absolute BS. Like there's no possible way. And he said, no. The key is you just got to make sure that when you're sleeping, get a multiple of 3. So like 3 hours, 4.5, 6 hours, 7.5. But don't get like, if you're at 5 hours or if you think that you can sleep for 5.5 hours, he's like, just stay up for an extra hour and shoot for the 4.5. And so I kind of loosely do that. So if whatever amount of time that I do get to sleep, I shoot for some multiple of 3. I don't really know if it works, but like, I don't know. I just always, for some reason, remember what this guy said. And I have tried to, at least shoot for that and stuff. And if I take a nap, it'll be some fraction of that, some 45 minutes or 23 minutes or, that sort of a thing. So, the only consistency that I have is maybe that, because there's some nights too where if I have the inspiration to stay up until 4 or 5 working on stuff, I'm going to do it. So I'm going to keep going, because sometimes you don't really, I have more control over when I'm going to go and force myself to go to sleep than I do when a wave of inspiration is going to, or a wave of focus. Sometimes that getting a wave of focus is just as important as a wave of inspiration, in the sense of, like right now I'm editing some new, videos to eventually put up of some of this new music, of us playing it, performing the new music. And we recently did these filming sessions to try to, when I tracked all of Tree Falls, it was in late 2018, and it was like 6 days of tracking where there was, like a strings and woodwinds day, and then a vocal day and quartet, like there was so much to think about. I didn't think to get any video, because like the one thing that was just going to be, I'm already just a total head case in the studio sometimes when it's my own project. So to have something as distracting as like videographer hanging around and stuff, I'm like, no, thank you. So, but then now I totally regret that, because it's like, man, there's no videos to this stuff. So we recorded some new ones, and the last couple of nights I've been staying up really late editing these videos, and editing is something that also that I really enjoy, video editing. It's just something that I've just like never had any formal training for, but I just love doing it, and I've loved doing it like ever since I was pretty young too. It's just kind of like a fun as a hobby, but now I can, it's fun to be able to edit the stuff myself and things. But sometimes I'm just so out of gas that I just like, I'm like, nah, I'm not going to even try today and everything. But the last couple of nights I'm like, all right, let's go, let's edit this video. Like, let me, try to do a better job on color correcting and like all this kind of different things. And, but so I'm like, well, if I'm in the zone that I feel like I just want to keep working on it, I'll sacrifice the sleep in order to pull that off, which doesn't always benefit me the next day. But sometimes then I'll attempt to sleep in late the next day if I can, so I can at least get a chunk. But I don't know. In a perfect world, I'd love to get at least 6 hours of sleep a night. It just never really happens. So yeah, I know how important, I read all these articles that piss me off. Like, it's like, well, early death is associated with like not getting X amount of sleep. And I'm like, screw you guys, because it's like I can't like a lot of times I don't like get a chance to get much sleep, or it's something weird, some weird little like I got to wake up early for this, and then there's gonna be the gig is like super late, won't get back until late, and quick turnarounds, and it's nothing I can really do to control that sometimes. So but it's just kind of hoping for the best. I do know how to I can't do it every night, but I can a couple times a month I can get myself to lucid dream. So that's been kind of cool. That can be, fun and, more interesting than just regular dreams or nightmares, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I've watched a lot of things about lucid dreaming and read I have a bunch of books on lucid dreaming and got really into it and enjoy the process of trying to make that happen. My little trick is, look at your watch or look at a phone or something in the dream. If you think you may be dreaming, then just look at any numbers or words, and then look away and then look back at them, and they'll always be different, because the brain can't like replicate the same set of numbers or letters once you've looked away from them when you're dreaming. So it, usually with a lucid dream, it feels like really, really vibrant and real. Like you're just like, this has to be real. I know this is real. I'm really here. And then I look at my phone and I look at the time and it says like 9:24. And then I look away and I look back at the phone and it says like X squiggle something else. I'm like, oh, I'm dreaming, So there's like little tricks that you can do to kind of, sometimes it's really fleeting because you realize that you're dreaming, and then you panic and boom, now you just woke up, But
that's
it's
insane.
Yeah.
That's like, you've seen Inception, right?
Right. Yeah.
You got to carry your little top, and spin it. And if it doesn't wobble, you're in a dream and you got to get out of there, man. That's
right.
Wild.
You need a little symbol or a sign or something that you can test it once it starts happening. I looked it up too, and apparently it's really rare. Like a double one of those. So like technically
you had
an Inception. I had it at Inception.
Hang on. Full stop. Okay, music aside, we're done with music. Hang on. You experienced Inception. You experienced a dream within a dream. So just to be clear, to make sure I am understanding this correctly, you have got yourself into a state of lucid dreaming, at which point in your lucid dream, you lie down and you go to sleep and you have a dream within your lucid dream?
Well, I woke up into a secondary dream and then woke up from the secondary dream. So, Uncle. So, well, I could tell you exactly. So I was in Istanbul, and it was the Turkish lounge in Istanbul is like the greatest lounge in the world, bar none. It's number one. It's its own like terminal of the airport where there's like a driving range and all sorts of crazy stuff. But there's also, when you have a long layover, there's like little hotel room beds that you can just have one of those. And I had maybe like a 7-8 hour layover because I think I was on my way to Tbilisi or something. And so I went into one of those little bedrooms that they have in the lounge, and I was already kind of loopy and jet lagged and all that, which is like, that's prime time for lucid dreams. Like that weirdness of like, if you wake up and then go back to bed, wake up, go back to bed again, that's high likelihood area, So I was dreaming, and I remember that then in the middle of the dream, I was able to control stuff because I did my little phone trick or whatever, and I didn't panic. And then I'm like, first thing I do in that scenario is I pick an object in the room where I'm like, okay, start levitating, and it'll start levitating. Like it just will. And so then you can start controlling things and like all sorts of, you get into whatever. But like I woke up out of that dream. All of a sudden I woke up and I was in a bed somewhere, and I was like, oh, well, that was weird. And I got up then and went over, like brushed my teeth. Like, I'm like, I got to get some breakfast. And then I'm like, definitely not still dreaming. And then I tried controlling something. I couldn't control it. And so then I was walking around, and then boom, instantly I woke up in a total panic in the actual bed in that Istanbul lounge. And the weird thing about that was like, I did some research like online of like, I'm like, has this happened to other people? Like what happens? And apparently it was a really rare thing that was like a secondary awakening. They're like, usually what happens to people in this circumstance is when they wake up in that interior dream, they do just normal everyday tasks, and they find that they can't manipulate objects. So it's still a lucid dream where you can't control your surroundings. But like it's a really rare event and stuff. So it did happen to me once where it was essentially an inception and stuff. And it wasn't a good feeling when I woke up from all that too. It was like real panicky. But I was like as scared as I had ever been, because I'm like, how many more of these are there? Like, so it is possible to technically have an inception in that sense and stuff. But the depths to that movie goes to are pretty, that's a pretty crazy movie. So I didn't get trapped, at least. I'm happy about that. So.
Well, there's no way I can have our listeners sit through a bunch more questions about music and stuff after that story. The one thing I will add, the sleep scientist Matthew Walker actually did talk about the REM cycle being 90 minutes.
Oh, wow.
So when you sleep for 90 minutes, your body's actually completing a REM cycle, and that's why you want to, if you're going to limit your sleep, which in and of itself is not advised from what I understand, I'm not a doctor, you want to do it in those 90-minute increments, because you'll actually complete your REM cycle, and that way your brain has cycled off, cycled back on.
Awesome. So I'm doing something right. I'm like, I've just been, I've been kind of just committing to it, that it's an easy thing in terms of clocking out. Like if I get sent an itinerary from a band or whatever, and I get the day sheets of like, okay, well, what time does the flight get in, and then what's the distance to the hotel. That's why all those little details on an itinerary matter so much, because I start to time out naps, and I'm like, am I going to be able to get to the hotel in enough time before sound check where I could get some factor of 90 minutes in, you know, like then I can kind of clock that kind of a thing out, you know, and only to be just totally ruined by whatever early lobby call is the next day, you know, and that sort of thing. Because also it's an important thing after gigs. I mean, these are, you know, when you're touring, you're going on field trips with your friends all the time. That's all it really, you know, ends up being. But, you know, just being around good people when everyone's all tired together, that can really help.
Ladies and gentlemen, Taylor, what can I say? Tree Falls is out now wherever you get your music on GSI Records. Le Poisson Rouge, September 23rd, New York City. Be there or be square. Taylor, let's hang out for a second after we call this a day and see if we can book another time, because this
absolutely.
Is
and I want to mention one thing for all the listeners, that you are an extraordinary interviewer. You know, you do like you know what you're talking about. You do research on things, and you ask very thoughtful questions. And so this has been like a great pleasure, just because I think people should definitely be tuning into your podcast, because, man, you get a lot of great conversations started.
Well, Taylor, I really, really appreciate you saying that. And I also extra appreciate you saying that while we're recording. So we've got that on tape.
Wanted to get that in there.
Very, very much. Oh, trust me, we're keeping that in there.
So checks in the mail, I'm assuming. Yeah.
that one is going on the bio, and like the little quotation marks.
Nice. Turn me into a GIF or something.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you next time.